Have you ever hated someone so deeply, only to fall for them in a way that wrecks your entire world? If you're here, it's because the title pulled you in. But let me promise you something right now. What you're about to hear isn't just another romance. This is a drama you can't miss. This is where money, power, revenge, and heartache collide. You're going to get the answer you came looking for. Why two people who swore they'd destroy each other somehow couldn't stay away. And by the time you reach the end of this video, you'll know exactly how it happened and why it changed everything. So, don't click away. Don't pause. This story is built to grab your attention and keep it locked till the very last second. If you've ever craved enemies to lovers tension with billionaire luxury, secret wounds, and the kind of chemistry that could burn down a mansion, then stay right here. This one is for you. Let me take you into a world where wealth masks wounds, boardrooms hide betrayals, and love, well, love is the last thing anyone dares to admit. Picture this. Midnight glass towers reflecting the city skyline, where billion-dollar deals are brokered with a single glance, and enemies are made over whispered secrets. And right at the heart of it is her, Ava Sinclair. The name might sound like it belongs to a perfume brand, but don't be fooled. She's fire and strategy wrapped in designer heels. She didn't come from money, but she made it. Built her empire brick by brick, scar by scar, and every smile she wears is calculated to win. Ava is sharp, driven, and allergic to failure. She's the kind of woman who enters a room and owns it, not because she was given power, but because she took it. She's never needed anyone, especially not him. And now, him. Let's talk about Damian Ashford. You've seen men like him in magazines, tailored suits, smoldering eyes, bank accounts that never sleep. But don't confuse him with your typical brooding billionaire. Damian's past isn't made of whispers. It's made of war zones, betrayal, and scars no silk tie can hide. He's the kind of man who calculates risk like most people check the weather. Cold, ruthless, a genius in the market and a hurricane in his personal life. Damian doesn't trust easily, love never, and forgive almost never. And yet, behind those guarded eyes lies a secret that could ruin empires. A truth is buried so deep, no one has ever come close to discovering it. No one, until Ava. Now let me ask you something personal. Have you ever wanted something you shouldn't? Something that, if you touched it, could destroy everything you've built? That's exactly what happens when Ava and Damian collide. It's a boardroom battle, a hostile takeover, a headline-worthy scandal in the making. But what neither of them expects is that the tension they feel isn't just business. It's something deeper, older, a pull neither one understands, but both feel, like gravity, or fate, or maybe just a raw magnetism of hate slowly melting into something terrifyingly close to passion. But don't get it twisted. This isn't some fairy tale wrapped in gold. There's real pain here, real betrayal, and a past that refuses to stay buried. Because here's the thing, Ava and Damian weren't always enemies. Years ago, before the billions, before the boardrooms, there was something else. A connection, a night, a mistake, something that left a scar so deep they both pretended it never happened. But the past is a cool way of resurfacing, especially when secrets are tied to legacies. And when one of those secrets can cost everything, including their hearts. That's where the real story begins. This isn't your typical enemies to lovers trope. This is about two people who can't afford to trust one another, yet can't stop gravitating closer. Every argument is laced with double meanings. Every stolen glance threatens to unravel the control they cling to. And the more they fight, the more they feel. But feelings don't fit into contracts. Emotions aren't assets. And in Damian's world, anything that makes him vulnerable becomes a target. Ava knows this. She's been burned before. But something about him makes her reckless. And something about her makes him remember he still has a heart. The question is, will they destroy each other, or will the fire between them force them to surrender? Now, if you've made it this far, let me tell you why you should stay. Because the real twist, it's coming. And it's not what you think. This story has secrets layered like luxury townhomes. It's full of emotional roller coasters, backstabbing rivals, slow burn passion, and psychological games that will keep your mind racing. And the best part? You're not just a viewer. You're in this with them. As Ava uncovers a truth she was never meant to see. As Damien is forced to choose between protecting his past or finally risking his heart, you'll feel their pain, their lust, their need to fight what's happening between them, and eventually their inability to stop it. I'm not here to waste your time with fluff. I know what you're craving: the drama, the betrayal, the slow burn love that crackles with danger. And I'm giving it to you, wrapped in billionaire fantasy and raw, human emotion. This isn't just entertainment. It's obsession. And as the story unfolds, you'll realize you're not watching them fall in love. You're watching them fall apart, just to find the pieces that finally fit. You're going to see the kind of love that costs something, the kind that demands sacrifice, and the kind that leaves scars. Because in a world where everyone's out to win, love is the only thing worth losing for. But right when they're about to give in, when the tension finally threatens to explode into something real, Ava finds something. A document. Hidden, misplaced, or maybe planted. It has Damien's signature. But the contents? They're explosive. They threaten everything he's told her, everything he hasn't told her. And in that moment, Ava is forced to ask, was it all a lie? Was the passion, the risk, the way he looked at her, just another strategic play? Or is someone else pulling the strings entirely? She doesn't know it yet, but the truth will break her, and him, and everything they've barely begun to build. So, if you think you're ready for what comes next, don't go anywhere, because the real story starts the moment she confronts him. And what Damien says next will leave you speechless. Damien didn't flinch when Ava stormed into his office. That in itself said everything. He looked up from his sleek walnut desk, the skyline glowing behind him like a crown, and gave her that same unreadable expression he wore in every shareholder meeting, part smug, part steel, and all control. But Ava wasn't here to play power games. Not this time. She dropped the file on his desk with a snap, her hands trembling only slightly, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. The document wasn't supposed to exist, at least not with his signature. It detailed a quiet acquisition of a company's core patents, rights that weren't for sale, rights she had never even listed. Someone had gone behind her back, bypassed firewalls, and built a paper trail so clean it looked legitimate. And yet, buried deep in the legalese, was Damien's name, written in the same signature that once signed her name in a birthday card when they were both still in college. The one she had kept for a year before finally throwing it out. Or had she? The past few weeks had felt like chess moves happening in the dark. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Clients she'd nurtured for years suddenly stopped answering her calls. Her closest advisor, Rachel, had grown distant, always glancing at her phone during briefings, her voice clipped, evasive. Even her assistant had changed. The last one had quit abruptly with no warning, and the new one, a man named Ethan with 2 white teeth and a resume that felt a little too polished, had inserted himself into Ava's workflow like he'd been planning it. The shift was subtle at first, like an invisible tide pulling her away from the shore she built. And Damien had been distant too, but that was nothing new. The strange part was how often their paths crossed lately, usually by coincidence. A shared elevator, an event neither of them was supposed to attend. And each time, his eyes lingered just a beat too long, like he knew something, like he was waiting for her to figure it out. But what was he waiting for? Ava had built Sinclair's strategies from the ground up, and she'd done it by being meticulous, unrelenting, and, above all, trusting no one, which was why this betrayal cut so deep. If Damien really had done this, it wasn't just business. It was personal. He knew what those patents meant to her. They weren't just algorithms and product models. They were haze, born out of all-nighters, heartbreaks, and caffeine-fueled sprints when she had no one but herself. For him to take them now, at the height of her success, wasn't just a blow. It was war. But here's where things got twisted. When she looked in his eyes as he casually flipped open the file, skimming the pages without a hint of concern, she didn't see guilt. She saw something else entirely. Something closer to confusion. Or maybe pity. And for a man like Damien Ashford, pity was more dangerous than any lie. The truth was, Ava didn't know who to trust anymore. Everyone in her circle had a motive. Rachel had been promised a COO position if Ava ever stepped back. Ethan, her new assistant, had connections to Ashford Enterprises, though buried beneath shell corporations and fake profiles. Even Mason, her ex, the finance blogger turned hedge fund darling, had recently started dropping Ava's name in interviews, hinting at her aggressive tactics and questionable alliances. It was subtle, calculated sabotage, and she was drowning in it. Every move she made was being tracked, every deal intercepted, every whisper twisted into a headline. Ava had spent years building walls around her, but now it felt like someone had slipped inside, planted seeds of doubt, and was watching from the shadows as her world began to crack. What haunted her most was the night she saw Damien at the Drake Hotel bar 3 weeks ago. They weren't supposed to be there, neither of them. And yet, there he was, nursing a drink he barely touched, staring at the wall like it held all the answers. She had almost walked past him. Almost. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the way his shoulders looked tense beneath that immaculately tailored suit, or the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was watching. She didn't speak to him that night. She watched, just long enough to see a woman slide into the seat beside him. Blonde, expensive, whispering something that made him stiffen. He got up without finishing his drink and left. And the woman? She stayed, pulled out her phone, and texted furiously for the next 10 minutes before disappearing into the crowd. Ava remembered her face. And when she saw that same woman in a leaked email thread a week later, connected to a shell firm that tried to undercut one of Ava's bids, something inside her started screaming. But she didn't have proof. Just shadows and hunchies. And in a world of billion-dollar games, that wasn't enough. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was playing both sides. That she was just a piece in a larger strategy. Damien wasn't sloppy. He was known for surgical precision. If he wanted to dismantle her, he wouldn't leave a breadcrumb trail. Which made her wonder, what if this wasn't Damien at all? What if someone was trying to pit them against each other, knowing their history with a perfect trigger? And what if, God forbid, he was trying to protect her? No, that couldn't be. Could it? The more she looked at the file, the more it felt off. The timestamps didn't align with the meeting she remembered. The IP address signatures, too vague, as if someone had intentionally scrubbed them. Even the legal wording didn't match Damien's usual style. It was too obvious, almost theatrical, and that was what made her pause. Damien didn't do obvious. Whoever did this wanted her to find it, wanted her to believe it, which meant the real betrayal hadn't happened yet. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was playing a long game, and Ava was the key piece on the board. But what Ava didn't know, what Damien hadn't told her, was that 3 days ago, someone broke into his private server. Not through the front door, but through a vulnerability no one should have known about. One that tied directly to the files Ava had just slammed on his desk. He had his people investigating it. Quietly, thoroughly, but someone was always one step ahead. And when Damien opened the envelope she left behind, he saw the signature at the bottom of the document. His signature. Except it wasn't. It looked right. It passed all digital verification tests. But he knew his own hand. And this one, the signature, was traced. Ava had no idea what she had just walked into. And neither did Damien. But someone did. Someone who had been planning this for months. Watching. Manipulating. Moving pawns in the shadows of their rivalry. And as a storm outside his glass tower rolled in with thunder and distant lightning, Damien picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The voice on the other end answered immediately, like they'd been waiting. And Damien, without greeting, said only one word. Begin. Everything that happened after that would change them forever, and neither of them would see it coming. Would you like me to continue with the next part, where secrets begin to unravel and the emotional stakes explode, in a modest apartment miles from Damien's high-rise fortress, the glow of a muted TV bathroom in flickering blue shadows? The air was heavy with stillness, interrupted only by the quiet scratching of a pen across a legal pad. Lila Monroe, an investigative journalist turned freelance consultant, had no business being involved in Damien Ashford and Ava Sinclair's tangled corporate war. But as fate often does in these high-stakes billionaire romance thrillers, it pulled her in anyway. She hadn't spoken to Ava in years, not since their college days when they were inseparable, when midnight ramen runs and whispered secrets were the most dangerous things in their lives. But earlier that day, an anonymous package arrived on her doorstep. No return address, no note, just a flash drive and a single black and white photo, folded in half with a paperclip. The photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but the moment Lila unfolded it, her breath caught. It was Damien and Ava, locked in what looked like an argument, standing outside the Drake Hotel weeks ago, the very same night Ava had seen Damien and the mysterious woman. But here's the thing, Ava was certain she hadn't spoken to anyone that night. And yet this photo, time-stamped, geolocated, and embedded with metadata, suggested otherwise. The frame was split-second specific. Damien's hand caught mid-reach, as if grabbing her wrist. Ava's face wasn't one of casual confrontation. It was pale, startled, almost afraid. Something didn't add up, and neither did the audio file that came with it. Lila listened to it a dozen times before she even dared to replay it. The voices were muffled, distorted through traffic noise and city air, but unmistakably real. Someone whispered Damien's name. A pause, then a woman's voice, clearer, lower, speaking a phrase that made Lila sit straight up. It's done. She has a file. The same file Ava had dropped on Damien's desk. But the problem was, if that message was real and not some doctored scare tactic, then someone had orchestrated Ava's discovery of the forged documents. Not leaked, not stolen, delivered. Ava hadn't uncovered a mistake. She'd followed a breadcrumb left just for her. But by whom? And why involve Lila? Lila had covered corporate espionage cases for years, had seen tech giants rise and fall under the weight of manipulated narratives and planted evidence. But this wasn't some Silicon Valley squabble over code. This was personal. Whoever was pulling the strings wasn't just trying to pit two power players against each other. They were orchestrating an emotional implosion. Ava and Damien's history wasn't public knowledge. Their college affair, the falling out, the power split, all of it had been kept private, buried under layers of PR control and silence. Only a handful of people knew. People like Rachel. Or Mason. Oh! The knock at Lila's door made her jolt hard enough to knock over her drink. She froze, hand hovering just above the table. It was after midnight. No one came to see her after midnight. Another knock. 3 quick raps. Then silence. She crept to the peephole, peering out into the dim hallway, and for a moment she thought it was a mistake. Just shadows. But then she saw it, an envelope, thin and pale against her doormat, tucked beneath a small, matte black business card. No name. Just a logo of Ashford Enterprises. Her breath hitched. She opened the door slowly, heart hammering. She grabbed the envelope and card and retreated back inside, locking the door behind her. The envelope contained just one item, a single newspaper clipping. An obituary for a man named Peter Grayson. The name meant nothing to Lila. Not until she read the fine print. Peter Grayson had died 6 months ago, in a freak electrical fire at a data firm headquartered in Boston, a firm that had once quietly contracted with Sinclair Strategies. And the kicker? The file attached to the flash drive, the one Ava found, was traced back to the same firm. Suddenly, the scope of this mystery ballooned far beyond a business rivalry. It stretched into the realm of secrets that someone had been willing to kill for. Lila felt it in her bones now. This wasn't a petty revenge scheme or a hostile takeover. It was a cover-up. And Ava? She wasn't the only target. She was just the loudest one. Lila knew she had 2 choices. She could bury what she'd learned, walk away, and pretend the whole thing was a hoax. Or she could do what she always did when the truth hovered just out of reach. She could dig. Hard. Meanwhile, Damien was spiraling through a different kind of revelation. After he ended the cryptic call with the old contact, he'd received an alert from his internal audit team. One of their inactive server partitions, an offline archive used to store legacy project files, had been accessed externally. The source? A proxy IP routed through Chicago. Someone was using his own company's abandoned data to build a fake trail. But here's where it got weirder. The access log showed not 1, but 2 entries, hours apart. One clearly traced to Ava's building. The other, however, was harder to identify. It wasn't linked to a corporation or even a residential address. It pinged back to a warehouse, one Damien recognized immediately, because he'd owned it. Years ago, back when he was still just an analyst, before his father's death thrust him into control of Ashford Enterprises. He'd used the building as a storage site for old financial records, forgotten tech, and one other thing, an unregistered terminal with full access to prototype systems they'd never deployed. Systems he now feared had been hijacked. Everything pointed to something older than the feud with Ava. This wasn't a fresh betrayal. This was a ghost from the past. A plan that had been quietly brewing for years. And it had just been activated. While Ava, Damien, and Lila raced toward different truths, someone else was calmly watching. In a dimly lit room filled with old monitors and flickering code, a woman sat barefoot, her knees pulled up to her chest, a laptop balanced on her thighs. Her eyes never left the screen, even as the messages rolled in. Lines of code, email threads, real-time location data, 3 targets, all moving in different directions, all exactly where she wanted them. And then, she smiled. ChatGPT said. On the other side of the country, where the sky over Seattle carried that constant silver hue and the rain never seemed to pause long enough to dry the sidewalks, Mason Whitlock sat behind the smoked glass walls of his own consulting firm's office, watching a video loop on his private monitor. It was security footage, silent, grainy, unnerving in its stillness. He had received it from a burner number only moments before, no message attached. The timestamp read 2 nights ago. The location? The underground garage beneath the Sinclair Strategies office building. The footage showed Ava pacing, alone, her hands clenched around a folder, possibly the very same file she had dropped on Damien's desk. Then, at exactly 11:42 p.m., another figure appeared, a man in a black coat, face obscured by a baseball cap. He approached her quickly, stopping just before her. Ava backed away, startled, and a short, sharp exchange followed. Whatever was said was lost to the silence of the recording, but Ava's expression shifted. Fear, disbelief, then what looked like resigned recognition. She nodded once, then turned, disappearing out of frame. The man lingered just seconds longer before slipping a small object onto the hood of her car, almost like he wanted it to be found. Then he vanished. What made Mason sit up wasn't just the footage. It was what the man left behind. Zooming in, frame by frame, Mason enhanced the object's shape, a flash drive, but not just any kind. A prototype model that had never hit the market. One he had seen only once, when Damien personally showed it off during a late-night innovation summit almost a decade ago. Back then, they were close, Mason, Damien, and Ava, a trio bound together by youthful ambition, hidden attraction, and a strange kind of emotional codependence that blurred the line between rivalry and obsession. But this changed things. If the flash drive in the video was the same one Damien used to brag about, a drive built with biometric encryption and self-erasing capabilities, it meant someone had access to technology that even Damien believed was lost. Worse, it meant that whatever Ava had found might have been planted using his old designs. Mason couldn't tell if Damien was a puppet or the puppet master anymore. And if Ava had truly recognized a man in the garage, then it meant someone from their shared past was not only back, but orchestrating every move with surgical precision. He pulled out his phone to call Ava, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried Lila. No answer. Unease crept into his bloodstream like frost. The silence wasn't just ominous, it was intentional. Someone wanted them all isolated, contained. He began typing a message to Damien, but paused halfway through. For the first time in years, he doubted whether Damien could be trusted, not just because of what the footage implied, but because of what he hadn't said. Weeks earlier, Damien had reached out after years of radio silence, asking vague questions about a ghost account connected to their university project, a digital ledger they'd built in their final year, something meant to track data footprints using behavioral algorithms. They never patented it, never even deployed it, but someone had. Someone had taken that skeleton of code and evolved it into something far more dangerous. If the original blueprint was being used to manipulate and trace behavior, then Ava's file, the fake access logs, even Lila's messages, every clue they thought they'd uncovered, could be staged, synthetic, controlled. As Mason stared into the dim monitor, another message pinged in. A single line. You were always too loyal, Mason. That's what made you predictable. There was no sender ID, no metadata. It was like the message had written itself on the screen, and then buried its own footprints. For a moment, He thought he was hallucinating, but the chill crawling up his spine told him otherwise. If someone knew what he was doing in real time, he was already compromised. He shut down the monitors, grabbed a hard drive from a hidden safe behind the bookshelf, and bolted for the stairwell. He couldn't risk using the elevator. Not now. But even as Mason descended into a deeper web of encrypted files and forgotten technology, another piece of the puzzle was surfacing elsewhere. At a private rehab facility north of Manhattan, discreet, expensive, and known only to the elite, a young woman named Callie Hartfield was nearing the end of her recovery from a breakdown she barely remembered having. A former executive assistant at Sinclair Strategies, Callie had vanished from the public eye after supposed medical leave turned into months of silence. No one had spoken her name in the corporate press, and Ava had quietly paid for her care, citing guilt and compassion. But now, as Callie opened a letter slid under her door, a letter bearing no name, only an address and a USB drive tape inside, she was beginning to remember things she was never supposed to recall. The drive, when inserted into the clinic's ancient desktop computer, revealed a series of voice memos. Raw, disjointed, but unmistakably hers. Her own voice, whispering about files she wasn't meant to see. Conversations she overheard between Damien and someone else. A code name, Project Nightglass. Repeated mentions of Ava. Something about a swap, a timed delivery, a betrayal. As the fragments played, she found herself gripping the sides of the desk, her breath ragged. These were things she had forgotten, or worse, had been made to forget. Callie knew then that whatever had sent her spiraling into mental collapse wasn't just stress. It was engineered. Someone had erased parts of her memory, and now someone else wanted her to get them back. The players were multiplying, the stakes rising, trust disintegrating. Ava's world was no longer a battleground between her and Damien. It was a chessboard where every piece had been placed years in advance, and none of them had realized they were already in check. Do you want to continue with the next part where Ava, Mason, and Lila's paths intersect, and Callie's re-emergence adds chaos to a conspiracy reaching far beyond romance and rivalry? The storm hit just before midnight, unforgiving, relentless, almost theatrical in its timing. Ava stood by her apartment's wall-to-ceiling window, the glass rattling against the force of the wind, watching the city lights blur beneath the downpour. She hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours, and the weight of everything that had unfolded in the past week had sunk deep beneath her skin. She felt haunted, not by ghosts but by the living, by people she once trusted, who now felt like shadows creeping just outside the edges of her perception. Her phone had died hours ago. The power was flickering. And worst of all, the sense of being watched, the strange prickle at the back of her neck, had returned. She told herself it was just the exhaustion, but that excuse had worn thin days ago. There was something else, something real, and it wasn't going away. It started with a missing file. The physical folder she had placed on Damien's desk had vanished by the time she returned to his office to retrieve it. No staff member claimed to have seen it. Damien was suddenly unreachable, his assistant Lila's number going straight to voicemail. She had checked the surveillance system, scrubbed. She had even tried contacting Mason again, but his office line was disconnected, and an email bounced back with an auto-reply saying he was on indefinite leave. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Someone was methodically removing her allies, one by one, and severing every communication line she had left. It was like watching the walls of her own life slowly close in, brick by invisible brick. Then came the note. It was slipped under her apartment door, no footsteps in the hall, no sound of a knock, just a piece of paper folded once, resting like a whisper against the tile. Ava stared at it for nearly 5 minutes before picking it up, hands trembling with a heaviness she couldn't name. She unfolded it slowly, almost afraid of what it might say. Just 3 words, written in red ink. Your next, Evelyn. The name was a knife to the stomach. No one had called her that in years, not since she changed it, erased it, buried the past with the rest of her family's secrets. Evelyn was a name attached to trauma, to a life she had run from. If someone knew that name, they knew everything. She dropped the note as if it burned her and backed away. The room felt colder somehow, darker despite the lamp still casting its glow. She turned off the lights and pressed herself against the wall, watching through the slats of her blinds. At first, there was nothing. Then she saw it, a figure in the shadows across the street, motionless, umbrella tilted unnaturally to conceal the face. Whoever it was didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, watching. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She didn't scream. Screaming would make it real. Instead, she backed away slowly, retreating into the darkness of her living room. Every sound around her suddenly amplified. The click of the refrigerator, the groan of the pipes, the dull hum of her own heart racing far too fast. She reached for her laptop, but the screen remained black. Dead. She tried the backup generator hidden behind the bookshelf, but even that had been disabled. She was alone now, truly alone, in a city of millions, with no one to call and nowhere to run that hadn't already been compromised. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. This was strategic isolation, psychological warfare, and someone had spent years designing it. The question wasn't who was behind it. It was how many of them there were, and how long they had been watching her without her knowing. Ava stumbled back into her bedroom and opened the drawer beneath her bed. Her hand closed around the metal handle of the small safe she'd hidden years ago, back when she'd first started climbing the ranks of corporate power and paranoia had just been a shadow, not a reality. She entered the code, and it popped open with a click. Inside, among the stack of old IDs, burner phones, and encrypted drives, was a gun registered in a different name, untouched since the day she bought it. She held it now, not out of confidence, but desperation. If someone came through that door, she wanted to believe she wouldn't hesitate. But the truth was, her hands were shaking too hard to even load it properly. That night, Ava didn't sleep. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, weapon in her lap, eyes fixed on the door like a sentry waiting for the enemy to breach the gates. Every creak of the floorboards above, every flicker of lightning outside, every shadow that moved where shadows shouldn't, it all chipped away at her sanity. And yet, despite the fear, a strange clarity began to settle in. She was a target, but she wasn't the only one. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase Mason, to manipulate Callie, to silence Lila. These weren't isolated incidents. They were coordinated. And that meant somewhere, at the core of this twisted web, was a single truth. Something they were all connected to. Something worth killing for. By morning, the figure across the street had vanished. But the silence left behind felt louder than anything she'd ever heard. Ava stood and walked to her desk, finally plugging in the last burner phone she hadn't yet used. She didn't know if she was walking into a trap, but she was done hiding. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. Then she dialed. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call," the woman on the other end said. "We need to talk about Project Nightglass before it's too late." The line went dead. And just like that, the game changed again. Ava wasn't just being hunted, she was being lured. And she had no idea whether stepping forward meant uncovering the truth or falling headfirst into a trap she'd never escape. ChatGPT said. The call haunted Ava long after the line went dead. Project Nightglass. The name reverberated through her mind like an echo in a locked room, bringing with it a wave of dread that she couldn't shake. It wasn't just a project. It was a key, the centerpiece of the maze she'd been unknowingly living inside. But what chilled her to the bone wasn't the cryptic title or the voice's eerie familiarity. It was the unspoken implication behind the words. You've known the truth all along. You just refused to see it. Ava felt like she was sinking into wet concrete. Every memory, every connection, every alliance she thought she could lean on now felt suspect, like poisoned water disguised in a crystal glass. And if she wanted answers, she would have to tear open the one place she'd sealed tight for years, her past. She made the call that evening, heart pounding in her throat. "Dad," she said softly when the line clicked. Her father's voice cracked in confusion. It had been years since she'd used that word, let alone reached out. They hadn't spoken since the fallout that tore their family apart, a mess of legal battles, shattered reputations, and a silence that neither of them dared to bridge. But she needed to know if he had anything to do with what was happening. He was the only one left who would recognize the name Project Nightglass. "Did you ever work on something classified in the mid-90s?" she asked, the question loaded like a weapon. There was a pause, too long, too tense, before he answered, and that was all she needed. His hesitation betrayed everything. "What have you gotten yourself into, Evelyn?" he whispered finally, his voice tight with old guilt and new fear. "I tried to keep you away from it. I burned every document. I changed your name for a reason." He told her to meet him, alone, no electronics, no tracking. A secluded house he kept in Vermont, a place she'd only visited once as a child. It sounded like a trap, and maybe it was, but the desperation in his voice was real. He wasn't playing her. He was terrified, and that terrified her more than anything. Before she left, Ava needed to do something she'd been avoiding for days. She showed up at Damien's penthouse unannounced, bypassing his private elevator locked away he'd once taught her in a moment of careless intimacy. When she entered, she found him standing by the fireplace, drink in hand, as if he'd been expecting her. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, voice smooth but too controlled. "Or maybe you are one now." She didn't respond. Instead, she tossed a note onto his coffee table, the one that read, "You're next, Evelyn." Damien didn't blink. He stared at it, then slowly looked up at her. "So, it's finally caught up with you two." His voice wasn't mocking. It was resigned. Ava's hands curled into fists. "What do you know about Project Nightglass?" she demanded. Damien exhaled through his nose, then turned to pour himself another drink. "More than I wanted to. Less than I should have. It was never supposed to go this far. Ava, your father thought he could erase it. I thought I could protect you by keeping my distance. But none of us are in control anymore. There's something much bigger at play now." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance stills, timestamps dating back years, even decades. One image showed Ava at 18, getting off a subway. Another, taken only 2 weeks ago, caught her speaking to Mason at the fundraiser. Every movement, every interaction, watched, recorded, catalogued. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking with disbelief. Damien's face shifted, and for once, the mask of the billionaire playboy slipped. "Because I was one of them once. I signed the contract. I took the money. I told myself it was just business. But it wasn't. We were playing with people's lives. Yours included." She wanted to hit him, or collapse, or both. But instead, she asked the one question that mattered. "Do you still work for them?" Damien looked her straight in the eyes. "No, but that doesn't mean they let me leave." That night, Ava had to decide, trust a man who had lied to her for years, or walk away knowing he might be the only person left who understood what she was up against. The choice ripped through her like a blade. But before she could decide, Damien handed her a flash drive. "If I don't make it out of this is everything I know. But be careful. Once you open it, there's no going back." She took the drive, stuffed it into her coat pocket, and left without saying another word. But even as the elevator doors closed behind her, Ava knew the decision had already been made for her. The truth came with a price, and someone had already paid the first installment in blood. When she reached the street, her phone buzzed. A restricted number. One new message. It was a video. She hit play, and froze. It was Callie, blindfolded, gagged, tied to a chair in what looked like a basement, her body trembling, bruises visible on her arms. A digitally altered voice spoke over the footage. "You want answers, Evelyn? We want loyalty." One more step toward the truth, and she disappears forever. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled. For the first time, the stakes weren't just about survival or secrets or ambition. This was war, and she had to choose between the woman who would become her lifeline and the answers that could unravel everything. There was no safe move left. Every choice now came with a cost. And someone, somewhere, was counting on her to choose wrong. ChatGPT said. She stood at the edge of the abandoned property where it had all started. The Vermont safe house, its shutters rattling against the wind like the final breath of a secret too long buried. Ava didn't flinch as a chill cut through her coat, nor did she move when the black SUV came to a stop behind her, engine humming low. It had been 48 hours since the final message. 48 hours since she made a decision that would either destroy everything or bring it full circle. She had uploaded the contents of the flash drive Damien gave her to 3 major media outlets, encrypting the most sensitive parts under legal counsel. She wasn't looking for revenge anymore, just release. The files named names, exposed transactions, and detailed the core of Project Nightglass, an elite surveillance ring funded by ultra-wealthy families to control narratives, manipulate political elections, and erase threats. She had been one of those threats. Her entire life carefully watched, engineered even. Her childhood memories, it turned out, weren't just fuzzy. They had been edited, purposefully manipulated by people like her father, who had once believed the ends justified the means. What surprised her most, though, was the silence that followed. No raids, no arrests, no assassins in the night. Just a low hum in the media that was quickly buried under entertainment gossip and the next trending outrage. The world wasn't shocked, it was distracted, and that realization, more than anything else, made Ava feel hollow. She'd risked everything, exposed powerful people, and most of the public just scrolled past it. But not everyone ignored it. In the corners of the internet, whispers grew. Encrypted forums buzzed with theories, digital breadcrumbs, and anonymous testimonies. People were waking up, slowly, quietly. That had to be enough. For now, Callie had been found 2 days earlier, barely conscious in a storm drained 10 miles from the city, her restraints loosened as if they'd been left in a hurry. She remembered little, just muffled voices, the scent of motor oil, and someone humming an old Billie Holiday tune. Ava had stayed by her side until the nurses had to forcibly escort her out. They were healing together, bruises to skin and soul that would take longer than either admitted. Damien disappeared shortly after. His penthouse was cleared out, his accounts frozen, his name scrubbed from several corporate boards overnight. A text came through from a burner phone. The morning she released the files. "You did what I never could. I'll be watching from afar. Don't look for me." Ava hadn't responded. She didn't need to. Her father, now in federal custody after turning himself in, had broken down in the interrogation room, detailing his part in Project Nightglass in exchange for immunity for the others. He'd looked older, thinner, his guilt eating away more aggressively than any prison sentence ever could. She visited him once, not to forgive him, not to reconcile, but to show him that she'd survived, that she wasn't broken. When she left the room, she didn't look back, and now she was here, where it all converged, where her name had once been changed, where secrets were born in whispers behind soundproof walls. A courier had left something for her there, a silver envelope sealed with wax, no name, no return address. Inside was a single photo, her, at age 5, holding hands with another little girl at a government-funded day school in D.C. The girl's face was familiar, too familiar. It was Callie, on the back, in typewritten ink. It was never random. You were always meant to find each other. Ava clutched the photo, her breath catching in her throat. The implication spun through her head like a roulette wheel, numbers and names flashing in blurs. Had they both been part of a deeper plan? Connected even before memory could anchor it? How much of her life had truly been hers? She didn't have the answers. Not yet. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to ask the questions. She walked back to the SUV and climbed into the passenger seat beside Callie, who was thumbing through a file of her own, pieced together from fragments the media hadn't released. Her expression was hardened now, determined, but not cold. "There's more," she said quietly, without looking up. "Other cities, other names." Ava nodded, her voice low. "Then we don't stop?" They exchanged a look, not of love, not of fear, but of purpose. As they drove away from the house, the camera would have caught the moment a figure stepped out from the tree line behind them. Damien, watching in silence, a knowing smile on his face, his silhouette fading into the shadows. And though Ava never saw him again, she often felt him close, like a ghost tied to the truth, a warning and a promise. The story didn't end with a victory speech or flashing headlines. It ended quietly, on back-channel forums, in encrypted whispers, in late-night conversations between survivors who finally understood they weren't alone. Ava didn't find peace in the truth. She found purpose. And sometimes that was a more powerful ending. So when people ask, what happened to the girl who took down billionaires, exposed surveillance conspiracy, and risked everything for answers, the truth is, she's still out there, watching, listening, waiting for the rest of the world to wake up. Because not all love stories begin with trust, not all mysteries end with justice, and not all wars are fought in the open.